Hello, beautiful boss babes. Are you ready to chase life with Kelly? Well, I'm your host, Kelly Chase, and I'm so excited you're here. We are going to talk about all things love, dating, relationships, money mindset. We're going to dive deep into self-love, worthiness. I am going to bring on some incredibly empowering guests. We're going to have fun, we're going to laugh, and perhaps we're even going to shed some tears together. I am here to empower you, inspire you, and motivate you to create the life you crave. I am so excited for today's episode. Let's dive in. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. We have a fan favorite on with us today. We have Mr. Mark Groves on the show, and I'm so excited to talk with him again. We had a conversation last year, and I just really enjoy talking to you, Mark. So welcome back.
Ditto. Thanks for having me back. I'm pumped.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So for those of you who may not have heard our episode before, or may not even know who Mark is, you may be more familiar with his Instagram handle at Create the Love. But Mark, you want to just kind of share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me. And my work really centers around, I'm pretty obsessed with understanding human behavior, relational behavior, why we do what we do, why we don't do things that are good for us, why we keep habits that are horrible for us, why the answer to relationship is often simple from a behavioral perspective, but so challenging to actually change. And to compassionately understand why that is, while we consciously move towards creating relationships that are fulfilling and filled with vulnerability and boundaries and all the beautiful things. So I'm just really obsessed with humans and how they act and why we act.
I love that. Me too. Trying to understand my own human behavior right
Yeah,
now.
same. I mean, that's where mine was born too, was a selfish desire to want to make relationships work out for me.
Yeah.
Then just being like, oh, wait, there's a lot to all this. This is really interesting. Let's get into this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how long have you been doing that? Like, made it more of like a public thing where now you have this huge popular platform, and which we'll get into next, but how did you get into that?
Yeah. I mean, you never know when you're going to start something, what it's going to turn into. I think that's one of the beautiful things of following your passions, your purpose. My friend John Morrow once said to me that if you want to find what you love, find what breaks your heart. And that really is so resonant for me, and to what made me choose the work. This work was that I experienced heartbreak, I experienced frustration, I experienced shame, I experienced guilt, I experienced all these feelings surrounding relationship. And when I got to a place where a relationship ended, at the time I was working in pharmaceutical sales, and I was obsessed with understanding how to change human behavior, how to get people to buy my product or prescribe my product over another one. And I'd been doing that for about 5 years at that time, and I was really good at it. I had won lots of awards for it. And then I had a relationship end. And when that relationship ended, I thought to myself, like, why am I so good at talking about everything else but my feelings? Why am I so good at all these relationships, but I'm really not great at romantic relationships? That doesn't make sense, because ultimately they're similar skill sets. So what's getting in the way? And so that led me, with the background in pharma, I had a deep understanding of how to read clinical trials, how to understand research. And I was really more interested in it from the linear perspective of, how do I read? Let me study psychology, sociology, let me study how relationships work. I ended up going back to school, taking positive psychology. And that was, I started my Instagram now, like 9 years ago, and just really started writing too, had a blog, and started working with people. Left my work. I left being a farmer at, I think, 8 years ago. So all at the perfect time,
Wow. And then as you just leaned into that and started posting things on social media and just grew this insane following, and people love you for it.
Well, it's
And so
been
that's that.
wild, My intention really at the first was that I felt like people weren't telling the truth about relationships, that they
Yeah.
do end, that they are hard, that people do get divorced, that your marriage or your relationship lasting can't be the only thing that you care about, because in the act of needing to fulfill that outcome, we lose our relationship to ourselves. We lose alignment with our values and our purpose. And I just thought, why is society so obsessed with relationships lasting at the cost of shaming people, membership in religion, community? It just didn't make sense to me. Like, if we truly valued our children, our aunts, our uncles, our friends, we wouldn't kick them out of our community because they got divorced. We'd say, teach us
Right.
about why your relationship, there's,
Mm.
and when you do that, not only does the community get better because it learns from the pain, from the suffering someone went through, and that is inevitably becomes wisdom, but the society also is made a much more healing space. The person then isn't experiencing shame for the ending. They're actually experiencing reverence and grace. And that's not often what we get from the people around us. And so it's hard to model grace for oneself when society says you're a failure because your relationship ends. And I say, man, some of the people I admire most had their awakenings from relationships ending.
Absolutely. Yeah. I being one of them, I would say that,
Yeah.
yeah, like so much. I mean, not just, from every relationship, but over the last 4 years, I would say has been the most significant, just healing revelations from and growth from my relationships. One being one that was on international television, like,
Right.
like that
That's
was
not a stage, right? If there's not a magnifying glass to our stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it was wild. Just like it's funny because I just like an article just came out the other day, because like season 3 is coming. So of course, like we're always like being like
Yeah.
pushed back out in the media, which is great and fine. And I kind of love it. But, this story came out and it was like, catching up with all the couples, and it said something about like how the person that I had connected with had addressed this, like that there was something about it. And I was like, that's not true. But I'm like, okay, like, granted, I don't know if those are his words or if it's the media's words. So I was like, okay, I can't like go to him and be like, you said the wrong thing. But I don't know. It was just like really funny. But that whole thing, like I had started my whole like self-love journey earlier that year before we even started filming. And then we did that. And I recognized, like, working with like a coach afterwards, like how much I was hurting more because of the rejection of it all versus
Yeah.
I was in love, and I'm
Right.
heartbroken kind of thing. But, it was just like, that was like a really, really big awakening for me, and recognizing like, wow, Kelly, you really were bypassing a lot of emotions. You were bypassing red flags. Like you could have protected your heart better if you had leaned into those red flags and not avoided certain things. And then that happened again. I mean, 9 months later, I got into a relationship with a guy that I have known for 20 something years and bypassed again, and it's like, we keep kind of experiencing until we learn the lesson. And then it's like, okay, we're done.
Right. Ideally.
Yeah, ideally. I mean, I would like to be done with it. But it was something with that particular person. I just had to end it again. Well, I ended it at this time, but that took a lot of courage and strength. And something I probably want to talk about with you is like, as far as there's a part of me that, because like I said, this is a person that I've known for like 20 something years. We're romantically attracted to each other, sexually attracted to each other. While also, I think if you were to totally like separate that, he doesn't want to commit. He doesn't think I'm the one, that kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure that I got caught up in the romance of everything and being loved and wanted, at times by someone. While also, if I take myself out and I look at the aerial view, I'm like, but is he the one for me? Am I sad and upset because I miss this person? Am I missing the story of what could be? Am I what am I missing actually? And what am I actually sad about? Because I know, and I've been treated by other people in the past that have treated me even better. But granted, during the last 2 years of the off and on with the other guy, it's been more friendship. It's not like, hey, I want to date you, and things didn't work out as a boyfriend girlfriend. It's like we were just having a situationship, more or less.
Yeah.
So it was like hard to navigate. And I'm like, I know that if you wanted to be with me, you would show up differently, but you're not, because you're just like my friend and we're just hooking up.
Right. And if we wanted to be with someone who could be with us, then we wouldn't tolerate a situationship, which is not to say that we don't want love or we don't want deep romantic connection. It's that whenever we say we want something and we're not choosing it, we know there's some sort of unconscious belief that's still operating in the periphery, and one of the qualifiers I would say that everyone should have for their person is that they want to be their person. So if you're not for someone, they're not for you. That's full stop. Like there's no gray to that. And a lot of us spend our time trying to hustle for that person to figure out that we are their person because they're our person, but we're actually missing that very important detail that they can't possibly be because they're not choosing us.
Right.
The qualifier for choosing anybody is they choose us too.
Correct.
And that can, be like, hey, I choose you. And they're like, I'll try it out. Sure. Okay. But it's kind of like couples that break up and get back together over and over again. Just pick some, because you're not committed to either. Right. We're not committed to growing, which I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that there's safety in ambivalence. There's safety in even being someone else's object of ambivalence, because we're living in the same wound of I'm not enough. I'm not enough for you to choose me. And then we wonder why we feel sad or depressed or anxious or all those things. And you can trace it right back to the fact that we are agreeing to stay in circumstances that are actually harming us. So I might declare that I want these things from a relationship, but if my choices don't match that, then I don't actually trust myself on a deeper level. Like I don't trust that. I might say I have these boundaries and needs, and I might even declare them in the relationship, but then I stay in the situationship. And so what that says is verbally or logically, I show up for me or I have these standards, but your body is left in a traumatizing circumstance, maybe a small T trauma versus a big T, or it can be a big T. It's like if you experience massive rejection or abandonment as a kid, then we stay in these circumstances that are familiar. It's like we are fighting a familiar fight. It can just be that our dad wasn't available enough. That can create that template, or our mom wasn't, right? Like it could be that we had an alcoholic. It could be all these different scenarios. But the main thing to be mindful, because I've certainly been in these scenarios, so this is not from a soapbox, is that we can't leave ourselves, and we can think of it as our younger selves. Right. Like our younger self is pursuing this familiar, what Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt would call imago match, IMAGO. And that imago is a familiar wounding template, essentially. And what we have to begin to at least process or continue to process is when I stop chasing that thing, being chosen, being enough, being whatever, that's actually where worthiness lives. Yeah. Like it's in the stopping that we find the thing that we think we find from someone else, but we actually find it from ourselves, which actually is so damn simple. But why is it not simple? It's like, but I am a glutton of punishment. I love unavailable people. I can't help who my chemistry draws me towards. Right. It can. Between arousal and action is choice. And, I had a former mentor who would say to me that you have to take charge of your charge. Yeah. And I love that because I didn't. I used to just follow my attraction to boobs, like that. It wasn't, they were discerning. I mean, it was somewhat discerning, but it was like if a woman showed up and wanted to choose me, that I didn't know how to process. I didn't believe I was worthy. I was afraid they'd find out that I was actually imperfect or flawed and
Yeah.
sensitive, and it was only in the acceptance of those things in myself that I could actually embrace what they can be, which is a superpower.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that's too why, like I said, I'm like, oh, I called it off again. I feel like it was like he called it off. Then we had like a mutual understanding, like, hey, this isn't working. We want to try and preserve our 20 plus friendship. Like,
Yeah.
But then it's like, a year later, we fall back into the same trap and we're like, why do we keep doing this? Like, what is wrong with us? Like, we need to stop. And, that was it. Like, I had a conversation with him a few months ago and I didn't realize like this is what was going to happen, but I just like had an explosion of emotions. Like I wanted to just be like, hey, I don't think this is working out for me anymore. Like, let's just revert to us, just go back to just being friends. Like, that's all that we can do. But as soon as it started to leave my lips, I just started crying. I couldn't get myself together. And he was like, oh my, like, where did this just come from? Like, you were literally fine 5 minutes ago. I was like, I'm still fine. I'm just, oh my God. Like, but I recognized, I was like, that's all the suppressed emotions that I have literally been suppressing, being honest with myself and honest with you for however long, 6 months.
That's so beautiful.
Now. So, and he recognized that too. And he was like, I didn't realize like how my actions, although, I felt like you understood where I was at, I didn't realize again, I guess, like how my actions were really affecting you. And, I'm sorry, I don't ever want to hurt you like that. And I'm like, I know. And I was like, but, it takes two to tango in a sense too. I should have been honest with you. I should have, as soon as I knew that this was not going in the direction that I wanted it to. And it probably wasn't from the very beginning, but I think I was like avoiding and just being like, I've got it. I can handle it this time. Like, I'm fine. I was suppressing myself and I wasn't really showing up as me. And so it was just interesting because like me being like, I think we can't be friends right now either. Like, we have to cut ties because as much as I want to just stop the physical part of everything and be able to call you and hang out with you and whatever, and just as friends, there be no sexual or physical anything, there is an underlying inside of me, this underlying feeling and motive inside of me that, okay, well, maybe what if? What if? Like, there's still that hope or there's still that intention of, but I want to talk to you every day. And that's not a friend thing to do. That's a girlfriend, boyfriend thing to do on, more or less. So, and then when he starts dating someone, I'm going to be like, what the fuck? Am I chopped liver?
That's usually what we do, isn't it?
I know.
We internalize it. Why wasn't I enough for you to commit?
Right. Exactly. And I was just like, I know that I'm enough. And I had to like I said, I just like drew the line in the sand. I was like, we can't do this again.
Well, that's where worthiness is born. What a beautiful thing to feel the grief.
Yeah.
In expressing that, it's like the
hard.
grief of how long you've been waiting to hear that from yourself, if I hear you correctly.
And it was very empowering. I felt empowered while also, it's been some time now and I'm like, okay, am I there yet? Am I there to reach out and be like, okay, like, how are you doing? How's life? But I'm not. I recognize.
Good. What a beautiful thing to accept. It's amazing how much we will stay in relationship with hope.
Yeah.
And I usually would invite someone to track back to where they've been doing that, because that's usually modeled from childhood.
When I was like 10.
Right. It's like, I hope that my mom or dad showed up more. I hope that maybe it's our first partner. There's usually like just an underlying seed of the desire for someone to fully choose, fully show up, and that can show up in perfectionism, high achieving. It can show up in so many things. And what a moment of reclamation to be able to say, actually, I don't choose this. This is not a match for me. Right. Oof, because in that is every moment in your life where you didn't do that. That's why reclamation is usually accompanied with shame.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily bad shame. It just is
Mm.
because in the recognition of choosing oneself is now the experience of all the times we didn't. Like it's a really powerful moment, because then the Rolodex in our heart goes back and it's like, there are like hundreds of times that we haven't done this. And now we have, but why didn't we do this before? And the truth is, you'll never do it till the moment is just the perfect moment.
Ready to do it.
Is odd, it could be a podcast, it could be a quote, it could be a friend, it could be them doing something that's finally enough.
Yeah.
But I'd also say I had a friend once say to me when I would get like casually intimate with this woman every once in a while. And she was incredible. She was great. Loved her. She's just a fantastic person. But I didn't want to be in a relationship with her.
Yeah.
And it was a mutual conversation. And my friend said to me once, "What is integrity to you?" And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he said, if you said that you wanted a relationship right now, would she want to be in a relationship with you? And I was like, "Oh yeah." And he's like, "So knowing that, is that an integrity for you to continue to be intimate with her, knowing that she actually wants something more, and you're, whether conscious or unconscious, taking advantage of that?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh wow." I had never thought about it. It was a new level of integrity that I'd never even thought about till he gave me that really beautiful friendship call out. And I remember apologizing to her, just saying like, "I didn't consciously do this, but now I know." And I remember having this dialogue with my friend after, just saying like, it's so fascinating that if we're willing to live at that level of integrity, then that means that the responsibility falls on the person who has the greater level of awareness of the pattern. Even if because we might say, well, you didn't stand up for yourself, or you two to tango, as you said.
Right.
Yes. And if someone is consciously aware that the other person wants a relationship and they continue to engage with them, they might be able to make excuses by getting lost in the gray of the language, which I used to do. But as soon as I knew that, it was like, no, the responsibility lies on the person to choose integrity for both people.
Right.
Which I think that's an invitation that if we all accept, the world would be a much better place.
I agree. I love that.
So it isn't your fault.
No, it's not my fault. It's not my fault.
It is your responsibility, but it is not your fault.
Correct.
You know?
And that's what I learned. And I was like, and there was no blame or anything on him either. He apologized and I was like, yeah. And I like, thank you. And I also could have been honest with myself earlier on and with you, that was my responsibility to do that. And I apologize for allowing my unhealed parts to continue this too.
Yeah. Beautiful. And here you are.
Here I am. Now I gotta just keep my alcohol level down, because then that's when I might get texty.
Yeah, then you gotta stop it till you can make a.
Yeah, no, I've been good. I've been good. I'm just kidding.
Alcohol is for sure the key to the booty call texts, or the.
Oh my God, it is.
Yeah. That's why you get rid of alcohol, and you can handle those things a little better.
Yeah. I was able to.
I don't think I've ever made a bad choice sober.
I don't think I have either. Well, granted, I have made illogical choices. Yeah, I have. But
I've never made bad relational choices sober.
No.
And I don't drink anymore, but that's when I look back, I'm like, if there's anything, like I've injured myself drinking, I've, time traveled, as they call blacking out, but.
Yeah, exactly. Time travel. I like that. Yeah, I've reduced my alcohol intake, but sometimes I just get a little crazy, and it's fun.
I get it.
It's real fun. No, that was great to hear. Like I said, I do feel really good about my decision and everything, and it's just recognizing, even having, like you said, that responsibility to continue where I'm at right now and continue to recognize my feelings and not act out of feeling lonely or whatever.
Yeah, so
I mean,
important.
it is a constant conversation that I have with myself, though. It's like, am I ready to have a friendship with this person? Can I do this? Do I really need to wait 6 months before I can reach out and do that? And
You'll
I
know when it is. It'll be
only
an
time will
easy
tell.
answer. It'll be an easy answer.
Yeah. But in the meantime, I'm like, okay, Kelly, you probably wouldn't want to reach out to him if you were dating someone, if you had someone
Right.
else.
It wouldn't be honoring the process.
Correct. So it's like, give it the time that it needs to heal while also focus on being happy and finding, attracting the person who is there ready to show up and to choose you back. And so that's where I'm at. I'm like open arm. I just downloaded one more dating app the other day. I'm like, it
Nice.
changed. I don't even know how to use it right now.
What's it called?
Well, it's Bumble. I just haven't used
Bumble.
it
Yeah.
forever, though. I haven't used it in forever, but I don't know. I'm dabbling.
Nice. A little Bumble action.
Yeah, I'm dabbling. We'll see. I just like meeting people out. So I'm trying to also be very intentional about being more social, attending local events. I used to be a social butterfly. Like I used to do that. More or less, I recognize it was probably more like a people pleasing thing. Whereas now I just want to do it for my own health.
Yeah, I used to get FOMO. Now I get JOMO, joy of missing out. With that said, I mean, I really like being out with friends and getting to hang out with friends.
Yeah.
And I think there is something beautiful and organic about meeting people in person.
I do too. I just love it. It's just such a beautiful, I don't know, it's just a different exchange of things, feel everything, body language, all of that. So I don't know, but I did meet I had like a natal chart reading done one time. And the guy was like, yeah, you're going to meet someone through technology. And I was like he works for a technology company or like.
He's going to email me. It's one of those princes from Africa. He'll send me $27 million.
Oh my God, yes. Okay, so I wanted to ask you because it's kind of like what was, I don't know, kind of got me to be like, oh, I want Mark back on my podcast. I always love having conversations with you, of course. But I'm on Mark's email, like his newsletter, and I get an email one day and he was just kind of saying, I feel like I've boxed myself in quite a bit and I haven't really been myself. And like it's like who you are. It's like, and so you were kind of out of alignment with like who you are and where you were going and who you're becoming and everything. And it just really spoke to me because I have felt ever since the show aired, there's just this like so many more eyes on me all the time. And it's more or less like how I felt like my audience wanted me to be. And like, who am I supposed to be? How should I be showing up? What should I be talking about? How should I be saying things? I don't know. And like, so I just felt like I was boxing my own self in. No one was doing that. I was doing it to myself, but and then, I came from a love, dating, relationship show. So like all of my content needs to be around like love, dating, relationship. And maybe there is,
right.
Like, obviously that's been a very big part of my journey as I just spent 15 minutes talking about. But, I felt like I was boxing myself in like way too much. So it just really resonated with me. And I wanted to ask you like just more about that. Like, what is the story behind that you came to that? Like, was there something that you like wanted to say and you felt like, oh, I can't because I'm going to get canceled or like what, like how did you come to the realization to send a public email to be like, fuck it?
Well, I think that the email's purpose was to just liberate me.
Yeah.
I think we can often get stuck in the prisons of what we believe our identity is or what people's expectations are of us, as you said. And listen, people don't have a problem communicating their expectations. And when you don't meet them, they love to DM, comment saying, I don't like when you do this. I mean, I have lots of people who say that all the time. I don't like this content. I don't like that. You're not supposed to talk about this. And I've spent the majority of my, I guess, public facing life being kind of like, fuck it. I'm just going to do me and tell the truth about what I feel is true and speak about the things I want to speak. With that all said, I think in the last 4 years, especially, although it's been creeping in culturally for a little while, probably over a decade, there has been a real shift to the cancellation of dialogue or nuance. So if there's a sensitive subject, and there's lots of sensitive subjects and movements now, which are rightfully sensitive, any criticism or dialogue that opposes being fully in support of everything that movement does, you're instantly just seen as anti that thing. And humans don't live in binaries as much as we've tried to fit them in. We've tried to say you're either right or left, you're either pro or anti. But humans don't fit into these very narrow definitions that have gotten narrower and narrower, and they've also gotten further and further apart. And there's a theory in politics called horseshoe theory, which is essentially that eventually the left and right become the same. And if you look at that, that's pretty true right now. And when I sit down with people, I actually don't even know what their political party is that they might affiliate with. I don't know their vax status. I don't think about any of these things till they have to be thought about. And when COVID first started, I was probably like everybody else, thinking about, I see these videos of people in China falling on their face in the middle of the street, and you're thinking, oh shit, like COVID's a real deal. And then when I started to know people who got COVID, and now if you look back, some people got it in 2019, where there was already a pandemic, we just didn't know about it, which that makes you just think, and I'm not saying there wasn't one. I'm just saying that does make you think if you just consider that.
Right.
And so when I started to get to know people who got it, or more about it, I saw that people weren't falling on their face in the middle of the street. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Why would they want us to have more fear? And the orange flags just kept piling up for me. I was a rep for 14 years in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm well-versed in marketing. I'm well-versed in launching drugs. I'm well-versed in how to launch them, how to get adoption of them. I'm also, I know how to read clinical trials. So as this was all happening, I interviewed a friend who's a physician about COVID. What did you need to know? I was very interested in people being informed. And then I saw physicians, experts in nutrition being canceled, censored for speaking about natural ways you can boost immunity, which those are real things, but that was getting censored. I thought, well, that's really weird. And then I knew that the way they were testing people, that test was not necessarily a reliable test if people learn more about it. I used to sell a product that used it, so I knew about the test, and that didn't make sense to me because you couldn't use that product. You couldn't use that test for diagnostic purposes. With the product I sold, I knew you couldn't, and I knew how it worked. And then I wanted to know, how many cycle thresholds are they running? Anyone can just go learn more about that. I don't need to get into it. But when it's a certain number of cycle thresholds, essentially, and the person who invented the test, the PCR test, Carrie Mullis, said, if you magnify it enough, you'll find anything. And so Fauci is quoted saying anything above 35 cycles is essentially a dead nucleotide. So it doesn't mean it's an active virus. Well, most of the labs were running 35 to 40, 45. So they were getting positives that might not have actually been active cases. And that just made me think, well, why wouldn't they want to have the most accurate measure of, again, like, I'm not thinking nefarious. I'm thinking this just doesn't make sense.
Right.
Why wouldn't they want an accurate number? When they're saying someone died, why wouldn't they want to make sure that they actually died from that thing? Because people who were, let's say, palliative and were given 3 months to live and died from the thing they were going to die from, but tested positive for COVID, were getting marked as COVID deaths. Some places, if they got hit by a bus but tested positive, within 30 days, they were marked as a COVID death. All this to say, I wanted to verbalize what I was experiencing, share what I was noticing.
Yeah.
I read the clinical trials. I thought it was crazy that they didn't make one of the endpoints of the trial reduction of transmission. For those of you who might not be familiar with how trials work, they choose primary, secondary endpoints, which means markers that they're saying, we're going to hit this. If we hit this, then they then apply to governments to get approval for whatever they hit. So you could see the emergency use authorization in the States and other parts of the world was for reduction of severe disease. That was the primary endpoint, one of the primary endpoints in the trial, but they didn't measure for reduction of transmission. And I know that pharma companies don't tend to choose endpoints they don't think they're going to hit. So you might get one endpoint, but then you successfully meet it, and then you might sell other ideas. This is called using a product out of indication. That is exactly what they were doing with ivermectin, was using it out of indication. So that means just using it for what it's not approved for.
Right.
And so when I was speaking up just about what I was witnessing in the trials, what I was witnessing in what was being told to us versus what was reality if you just went just a tad deeper.
Right.
I was very surprised that it was being encouraged to not have dialogue. Like I was being called selfish. I was being called right-wing.
Yeah.
I was being called anti-science. And I was like, wait, this is science. Like science is the act of dialogue and debate. I was really concerned when I was seeing some of the world's foremost experts in epidemiology, public health. If they didn't agree with the main narrative, they were instantly canceled by their institutions. And then I saw that they were promoting it for pregnant women. And I thought, well, there's no data in pregnant women. So I don't know how, I was just saying, I don't know how you can say it's safe if you don't have data confirming it's safe. It seems like quite a high risk. And it usually takes a lot of regulatory steps to get approval in that group of people.
Yeah.
And so my experience with all that was kind of in the first 6 months. And I started to silence myself because I was getting so much pushback, and I was also being barraged by family, friends. And I started to see the psychological process that was happening because it was happening inside me, but it was also happening outside me, which is we started to use language like, we're doing this for each other. We have each other's backs. We're keeping each other safe. I wear my mask for you. You wear yours for me. Public health has what they call nudge tactics. Nudge tactics are psychological tactics that they use to increase adoption of behaviors, which obviously can be very good. But there is an ethical line where you can't exploit fear. There's an ethical line where you can't exploit belonging. And what I saw was that they were using shame as a main tactic, and they were weaponizing belonging. Like, don't invite your family member to Thanksgiving. Well, if they're not vaxxed, don't bring them to Christmas. And I thought, oh my God, like this is crazy to me. And when we finally acknowledged that the product didn't reduce transmission, we still had people saying, but I can't be around someone who's not vaxxed because it's not safe for me. Well, that doesn't make any logical sense. So I just thought, well, when people are terrified, if you look at the research of something as simple as in a workplace, someone saying, can I give you some feedback? That statement actually causes people to go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So they get dysregulated, even though that feedback might be positive. But they go into this dysregulated state, and what they see is that their prefrontal cortex shuts down, which is the part for critical thinking, problem solving. And this is true of relationship. When people are triggered in relationships, same thing happens to them.
Can we talk?
Right. Can we talk? Can we talk? And it's like, no, we cannot. Absolutely not. And there again is why we go into these dysregulated reactive patterns that create our relational outcomes and prevent vulnerability and intimacy. So I just saw this going on a much larger scale, which was we weren't allowed to have conversation, and conversation is the bridge to understanding and intimacy. And I was watching on a cultural level that we were saying, if you choose this intervention, you're a good person. And people identify as being good. That's just how most humans identify. So if I say, hey, it's for everybody else and it's what a good person does, you're naturally inclined to do it because you want to have alignment in your values with your choices. So if all of a sudden you say, maybe that's not a good fit for me, well, now you have to reconcile with that. You're still a good person, even though you're being told you're not. And you also have to reconcile with the fact that your family might say you're not a good person now, or your friends might, which we all saw this, and we might have been the people who perpetuated it too. And no shame, because everyone's just been manipulated at a level that I don't think anyone was prepared for. So all that to say, is that in the desire to just want to talk about things I was seeing, which I had no judgment on, I just wanted to dialogue on, because I think everyone should be able to choose what's right for them,
Right.
is I started to silence myself. And then I would do podcasts with experts and talk to people, but my Instagram became a place where I didn't necessarily speak as much. I was getting censored. I was getting shadow banned.
Mm.
And then that was affecting my business in a very, very large way, not in a minute way. And because of that, I abandoned my integrity. I stopped talking about it as much. I was more cryptic. I was reactive. I was angry. So sometimes I'd post things that were divisive, just in a different way. And when I finally realized all that, I was like, oh, wow, like I started to have anxiety, and I just started to realize just how much I was creating circumstances where my silence was a choice, and I was conveniently able to blame everybody else, cancel culture, algorithms, shadow banning. But at the end of the day, I still had to sleep at night, knowing that I was silencing myself. And I was told that I was acting quite privileged by speaking out against things. And I said, well, if you look at the demographic of the people most affected by mandates and the lowest vaccinated group, it is marginalized communities. So I actually consider it a great privilege to be silent. And when I started to just have those awarenesses, I thought, how do I want to be remembered? Like, what matters to me? And I would lose everything if it meant I at least get to participate in the attempt at having a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think the world has been a scary place for that, because any attempt to have a conversation is met by the attempt to take away your livelihood, to cancel you, to ruin you. And, I'm all for accountability, and I think where cancel culture has missed the mark, which it is a correction to people not being conscientious of their language or their privilege and their power and their exploitation of power. But it has been an overcorrection, because you can have accountability without annihilation. Yeah. And isn't this so indicative of just how we operate as a whole, though? You have someone in your family get divorced and you cancel that person in your family, as opposed to, as I said before, bringing them in and being counseled by them. Like, that's restorative justice. Yeah. And I'm not saying people shouldn't be held accountable, or if the right step is to, remove yourself from their life, or whatever it might be. Right. I just think that we can't live in these binary experiences. And the danger to society is that when you don't have dialogue, as Jonathan Haidt talks about, that between two different opposing views is a third view. And that third view is seemingly wiser than the first two. And I love that, because that's so true. Like, if you and I disagree on something as friends, we actually, between the two of us, can find a deeper wisdom from both perspectives. And there seems to have been a loss in the understanding of that. And I think it ultimately comes back to the fear that's been perpetuated, which is, if you don't agree with me, then you put my safety at risk. Right. Just like if you look at the other side of that conversation is, if you don't agree with me, you're going to take my freedom and sovereignty away. So both people are actually oscillating around similar values. They're just oscillating in a different way, and generally moralizing one way. And I interviewed the professor of medicine from Stanford, Jay Bhattacharya, who is one of the early people who spoke out, and he is a co-creator of the Great Barrington Declaration, which proposed focused protection just on people who were vulnerable, elderly and obese. The greatest risk factor for dying from COVID is actually age, and then it goes into comorbidities. But he was saying to me that a failure of public health is one to oscillate around one thing. Public health is not about one thing, because then you don't take into account all the periphery. But he said the other thing is that a failure of public health is to moralize. And I thought, oh man, isn't that what we've done? We've moralized. And so we've just perpetuated shame. So my email was about just reclaiming myself and saying, I actually am not going to create a world that eradicates dialogue. And I've been participating in it by silencing myself. And the greatest act of censorship is self-censorship. So most of us know that relationally, and a lot of us know that collectively. And they're usually a similar behavior.
Absolutely. No, I love it. Like I said, I just felt so like, I was like, yes, like I feel, I on the other hand, feel like there are certain things I will maybe want to say or want to talk about.
Yeah.
But maybe the reason why I don't is maybe because I don't trust that I have enough facts in a sense to back myself
Yeah,
to
people get overwhelmed by that.
to like have like a healthy debate or a healthy discussion even with anyone, and I just am like, okay, I don't want to like stay in my lane for right now, Kel, until you feel like you do have a strong position to speak on those things. And I can lightheartedly say some things, but that lightheartedness can be taken very serious to another person. So
the internet takes a lot of things seriously. You could
really
share a picture of a puppy and people will be offended,
I know. It's like everything is just so wild. But yeah, it's been interesting. I was raised in a very holistic environment, and with that, medication and vaccines and all of that has not really been. I was probably vaccinated when I was 5, and maybe I've gotten like a tetanus shot here and there, since, but like
I got a flu shot, like 6 years ago.
I don't
I
think
got
I
the flu that week. I'm not
Yeah.
blaming the shot, but I'm saying it didn't help me the 1 year I got it.
Right.
The data is interesting on all those things, but
It is.
it's not up for discussion generally as a culture. We're very
Right.
afraid of it. And we use words like conspiracy theorist or misinformation. But I could literally go through the president of the United States speeches and label tons of things misinformation, especially about COVID. The head of public health in Canada, Dr. Tam, misinformation all over the place.
Yeah.
But if you noticed, which I'm all for things being labeled if they're not factual,
Right.
the challenge I have is that they never label things that are unfactual that promote the product. They only label things that might make you hesitant. And I think what's really fascinating, just from a discussion perspective, is that trying to abate or stop vaccine hesitancy by canceling or deleting or not allowing discussion of actual possible side effects and risks isn't actually creating true vaccine adoption or informed consent. It's giving the illusion of consensus by deleting and canceling anything that might criticize, which just from an ideological perspective is really dangerous, because if you look at history, whenever governments have taken it upon themselves to control a narrative, quote unquote, it hasn't worked out so good. And, the purpose of studying history is so we don't repeat it. And I think we're repeating a lot of the characteristics, which is unfortunate, but necessary, because much like we do when we repeat patterns, sometimes it needs to hurt enough that we have to pay attention. And I think this has hurt a lot. I think we've all been through, no matter how and where and what our perspective is, we've all been through a collective trauma, and fear doesn't allow us to critically think.
I agree. Yeah. One of my favorite mentors said, when your emotions are high, your intelligence is low.
Oh, that's a great quote.
Yeah, no.
That's so true. That's so true of every, when do relationships really get ruined? It's when we say something in the moment that we wish we hadn't said, or when we're drinking, or, when we're not present. And that's because we're dysregulated, because we're reactive.
Yeah.
And we can get really, I think one of my main experiences in the last 3 years is I really got lost in like my identity as being someone who only talks about relationship, or that's where I've had, it's easy, you're not going to face a ton of criticism talking about relationships, like attachment theory, codependency, dating unavailable people. Like, you're not really, the only time you really might stir up some trouble is when you talk about infidelity. That always gets people real revved up.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're not going to be hated generally. But you talk about these very delicate subjects and you're going to get emotional reactivity,
Yeah.
and I think in my fear of not wanting to be where someone dumps their trauma, I also silence myself, which is a trauma response. So, the irony of that is not lost on me.
I feel like it's always like
Right.
the duality is always present.
Yeah.
I recommend, like, even, it's interesting. Speaking of people who, like, there's infidelity and cheating and whatever that goes on, there's a part of me, maybe because of the healing work that I do and the awareness that I have, it's like, okay, I'm highly aware that hurt people. Like,
Right.
it's like people aren't just doing it just for the fun of it. Like, there's something inside of them is hurting, whatever the case may be. And so that's why they do what they do. And, I did have a friend one time who experienced infidelity in her relationship. And my response wasn't what she wanted to hear. But I was like, basically, like, he did what he did because he's hurting. And versus, I'm sure she just wanted me to be like, yeah, fuck him.
Yeah. People don't like that answer. That's like one of the ones. That's one of the ones.
Yeah. But, I'm not going to, like, I have, like, there's a part of me, like, I can give the empathy or hold the empathy for the person while also being like, yeah, it wasn't right, dude. Or
right.
Girl, it wasn't right. Like, so let's look at this. This is an opportunity for you to learn more about yourself so that you don't repeat this behavior and people don't keep shitting on you. Like, you don't keep shitting on them. Like, you have to learn from the experience. So I try and hold as much empathy as I can around people who do not so, make not so great choices, but that's where I think sometimes my friends are like, Kelly, you're like too nice sometimes. So I'm like, yeah, but we're all human. We all screw up.
Well, we can have compassion and I think we often mistake being compassionate as being tolerant.
Yeah.
But, you can know that a behavior comes from pain,
right,
and not tolerate it. Right. But most of us don't know how to live in that polarity because it's kind of like if you're empathic, then you have to love everyone. It's like when we say, oh, I love them unconditionally.
Yeah.
No, like you have to be engaged with them with the conditions.
Right.
But your love can still be present. That's what unconditional love is. But unconditional love is not unconditional tolerance. And that's a big confusion that I think a lot of people have because they learn as kids to tolerate all the bullshit from their toxic parents.
Yeah.
And, they don't have a choice ultimately because survival's on the line.
Yeah.
And so we learn to tolerate a lot of things that we wouldn't tolerate as adults. But then unfortunately it gets framed in a way that's what we learn as adults, and so the growing up or the changing, as my partner said recently, is like you stop centering your life around your wounds, and you start living from yourself, which is such a different way of being.
It is. It definitely is. Yeah. How do you, when people are recognizing, because I was very unaware. I mean, 5 years ago, if someone were to ask me anything that I know today, really, it's like, I guess I haven't really put, identified, I guess, like where to not cast blame and judgment on your caregivers, on your parents, because like, as you start to awaken to, oh, that was actually like, that's a limiting belief that I learned from my mom, or that's a story I learned from my dad, or that's something I heard on TV. It's like, how do you get to a place where you're not coming from a place of like blame and reaction, and you can be okay with that? Again, I guess it kind of goes back to like, well, that's just like how they were raised, and it's just been passed generationally and everything. But I don't know, like, because there are sometimes like I still find myself like I'll have a conversation with my mom and she's just trying to be helpful, but I'll like snap at her and I'm like, Gilly, don't do that. So I know that there's some type of like, it's still a protector part of me that's like, oh, this is familiar, we don't like this, and so I'm trying to address those protector parts of me. But I still am getting triggered too.
Well, yeah, welcome to being human. Triggers don't go anywhere. I think what happens is what we do with them changes.
Yeah.
So, with moms, I think, are incredible learning opportunities for growth. As are dads, I just think moms, because they're our primary attachment, they're usually often more of a fragile source of our pain.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot of pressure as a mom, and I don't know that we can ever look back and say we parented perfectly, because you can't, because there's no such thing. And when we define an emotional wound, we say it's any need that doesn't get adequately met. Well, we all have needs that don't get met as children. We often don't even know how to verbalize or ask for them to be met. And so that's an act of learning. And inherent in the relationship dynamic with parents is that we are infantilized. So we're children. And there is a moment in our growing up where we actually become adults, but often our parents have a hard time meeting us eye to eye.
Yeah.
And so there's not a growing up that occurs culturally. If you look at the history of humanity, we used to have initiatory processes that indicated the line between adolescence and adulthood. For women, that might have looked something like going through menstruation, right? That was one of the ways that a woman was considered a woman. For men, it was sometimes being sent out into the forest. There's a tribe, I forget what tribe it is. It might be the Maasai people, but they paint their adolescents. I forget what age they do it at. I think it's 13, but they paint them in black, and they walk around the town, and they're to not be acknowledged, because it is in that moment that they die. Like their adolescent self dies, and they are now responsible for the village, for the family, and they're given a new name. I think I have that right, but I know that the death is correct, and then they are given a new name, and it's like this process that delineates adolescent, adult. And we all need those processes, but we don't tend to have them anymore.
Right.
So when we have a parent who's still infantilizing us or giving us advice that's unsolicited, which I can relate to that.
Yeah.
It does take the necessary communication to say, hey, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness, and I appreciate your advice. Moving forward, does it sound reasonable that, I ask for that advice before you offer it?
Right.
For some people, they'll take that very personally, but that's okay. What's happening is, even in the reaction to that, is the reorganization of the relationship. And so that's how we move into adulthood. As I said, we stop centering our life around our wounds, allowing enmeshment, allowing overfunctioning, allowing all those things, codependency. And we start to actually operate from ourselves, which says this is or is not okay. And we have boundaries that surround our values, and we take responsibility for our side of things, and we graciously request that people change in a way that's productive for the relationship.
Yeah. And what if they don't want to change? I know that that's probably a question so many people have. They're like,
yeah, it's a great question.
There's so many, granted, I feel, for me, I'm going to want someone that's going to want to continue to grow and do their healing work and do all the things, but I'm sure there's many people that are in relationships where they are doing some type of personal development journey. They're on their self-love journey, and their partner is not. And it's,
right.
How do you navigate that, and how do you empower your partner to do that? But if they won't, and then you're growing apart.
Look, relationships only function when we operate based on shared agreements.
Yeah.
That we are both creating similar things, moving in the same direction, have similar values.
Yeah.
If one person has the value of trust and the other one doesn't, then it's not going to work. If one has the value of growth and the other one doesn't, it's likely not going to work. And, sometimes we wake up in our relational patterns and we say, oh shit, like I'm just learning about attachment theory. I'm just learning about choosing unavailable people. I'm learning about codependency. I'm codependent AF. I got to change. But of course, the relationship is still formed on maybe let's say the wounded agreements.
Right.
A lot of relationships, the people don't even actually come up with relationship agreements. They just trust that the relationship will somehow make its way to the future that they haven't even drawn out, or they have in their head, but they haven't made sure that they have the same one in their head, partner's head. Right. And so that requires communication. It requires the it requires the willingness for the relationship to end, because the relationship has to end in its previous incarnation anyways,
Right.
because new agreements are being formed. So I'm not saying you have to leave everything. What I'm saying is you have to invite everything to show up with you.
Right.
There are people who, you can make an agreement that says, I'm willing to hold 3 months or 6 months or a year. We might even say, I'm willing to wait till my kids graduate. That's a common one. And you get to make whatever agreement works for you.
Right.
And at some point, if you're not growing for the relationship to hold it together, then you're going to resent the relationship. You're going to resent your partner. You're probably going to get sick. And you're not going to feel self-expressed. You're probably going to feel anxious. You might feel depressed. And then you're going to seek medicine to solve a problem that only reclamation really can solve. Medicine can treat the symptoms of self-abandonment, but reclamation is what liberates us from it. And that's why you see people, and this isn't always true. So I'm not saying, I'm not like spouting from some woo-woo world. What I'm saying is that often you'll see people who have autoimmune, which is often correlated to trauma or triggered by trauma, not always. Sometimes it's environmental traumas, it's food, it's different things. And when they liberate themselves, their body gets into a rest and digest state. Their nervous system calms. And the body is so incredible when it's in these states of rest, which really means that it's in a state of safety.
Yeah.
And so if we've spent our life being vigilant or self-abandoning, especially if we're the one trying to save people, trying to get the addict to quit, staying with the partner who's easily angered, we're constantly on eggshells. Our nervous system is not chilling. It's not exhaling. It's constricted. And if you look at what a body does when it's afraid, which can simply be a high conflict relationship, you don't even have to be fighting at the time. And in the research from the Gottmans, they see that couples who have high conflict, who are just sitting beside each other and not fighting, their bodies are actually acting like they're sitting beside a tiger. So biologically, what happens when we're in that state is our vision narrows because we're looking for exits, right? So that's what happens on a biological level. So I don't see as much opportunity. I can't see as much of the world when they look at the biological reason or evolutionary reason for positive emotion. The positive psychologist who wrote a book called Positivity, I think it's called. It's by Barbara Fredrickson. And she talks about how really positive emotion came about in order, she calls it the broaden and build theory. That like when you're in a positive state, you're more likely to be open to social connections. Tribes can merge, they can share resources, and you're able to see more. You're open to more opportunity. Think about our cognitive bias. We have a negativity bias. We have a bias that looks for the negative. We have a bias that looks for our beliefs to be validated. All of this narrows our vision. Same is happening when we're in a state of conflict. Is my blood is not going to my gut because digestion is not important in that moment. What is important is escaping.
Right.
And so my heart rate variability will be low, which is indicative of your vagal nerve, your nervous system state, and sympathetic and parasympathetic activation. And so all that to say, when we're in these stress states, our body's not in a healing state. And think of so much gut issues come from people being stuck in that trauma response.
Yeah.
And so all of it is connected.
It is. 100%.
Social media has a drastic impact on people's nervous system state. Look at all the increase, especially in women, young girls, in anxiety and just mental health issues due to the advent, in large part, of social media.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I mean, I feel the effects of social media at times. It's
Me too. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting because like, although I was like yesterday, for example, I like was on TikTok a lot, just like creating fun things and so was on social media in general a lot yesterday and posting things to my Instagram story and creating reels and all the things. And like I slept in today. I could not get out of my bed.
Right. Exhausted from creativity
creativity. And I'm sure that I was also in the, interim of posting things, I was consuming things. So it was just like, I was like on my brain.
It's hard not to.
Yeah. I was like creating and consuming the whole time. I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, it was like just recognizing like, why are you so tired today? You just can't get out of bed.
I went to go on there just to do something, and all of a sudden you end up like, I went on my phone to go get a detail that I needed for a form. And all of a sudden I was doing something totally unconsciously. I was like down an Instagram rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And listen, those social media platforms are shifting a lot. TikTok is a content forward app, which means you're getting content not necessarily from people you follow. You're getting content that they think you'll like. That's been really smart from an algorithmic perspective because it's managed to capture people's attention more. Instagram is moving to that. They certainly have. I think everyone notices that. They prioritize reels over everything. And in doing that, they have, they've changed the way that people interact with the app. And they've made it so people consume more content, because what makes us consume more content? Well, if we're enraged or I guess engaged in some way, then we're going to scroll more. If we're mad, if we're divided, if we're upset. That's why mainstream media and social media platforms are rewarded for making you upset and dividing you.
Yeah.
And we blame each other, but we should actually really blame the exploitation of our attention, which our dopamine and our minds are primitive. They weren't designed to, although they're changing rapidly, they weren't designed to have a fucking phone that can give you more information in one search than you could find in your whole life. I mean, that's wild.
It is wild. It is. And our nervous system is like freaking out.
Yeah, our nervous system's like, what are you doing to me? And we're like, it's like, go find a garden.
Yeah.
Pull the carrot, you know, like
absolutely.
stop taking booty pics on cliffs, you know,
Right.
or do that. Just don't fall off the cliff, and don't place your value in how the booty picture does, you know, but that's so hard to do as a human. Just like it's hard to do as a creator. You post a video, you see how it interacts. Oh, well, it wasn't a successful video because it had less interaction. Is that actually true? I mean, the algorithm can totally make you feel like shit about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I had to wrap my brain around, because my stuff, I'm like, oh my God, like whether it was a reel or just like a caption that I was like, this is so good and so powerful. And then it would not get the engagement that I was expecting. And then I was like, oh my God, like people don't like it. You know, it was so it was not worth that I was putting in the hands. And then I was like, no, it's algorithm not pushing my stuff in front of people's eyes. That's what's going on. Like, no.
That's the world today.
So crazy. So it's great to like unplug as much as you can. And I think that that's also at the beginning when I was like, I'm just trying to be more intentional about being more social, because I mean, for the last couple of years, I mean, the first year, I think everyone was in their homes, but I still like, I work for myself. I work from my house. Like, so I'm not leaving my house that as often. So I feel like because I don't have as much social interaction, I'm on my phone and I'm not, you know, or I'm like, okay, what do you need to clean today to like not be on your phone?
Think about how much online companies skyrocketed in value. You have the greatest wealth transfer in the history of humanity in 2 years. You know, I forget how many trillions went from the lower and middle class to the top 0.3% of humans. It's fucking wild.
Oh, for sure.
You know, it's a very profitable time. War is profitable, healthcare is profitable, and so is hence pandemics. They're profitable. You know, as much as they're traumatizing, they are profitable. And we have to look at, I mean, where your energy goes, your money flows too. So
I know.
They know that.
Yep, they do. Oh my God. Well, this was so good. I know I can always talk to you forever.
Thanks for having me.
I know we like bounce around different topics, but I like covering different things.
Hey, they're all correlated.
They are. I know. As you said, it is all connected. I mean, yeah, it kind of like just to touch on the, like our gut and like constriction and everything. Like I recognize it was, you know, just because it like, obviously the more in tune I am with myself, I'm very much more aware of my body sensations these days. But it's just so interesting because when I get like a text or a phone call from a particular person and I see their name come across my screen, my gut immediately like clenches up.
Tells you a lot.
It does. And I'm like, okay, what do I need to address right now? So, but yeah, but like how that affects other relationships and how that affects how I'm showing up in other areas and protecting my energy. Maybe it's not maybe we don't answer the phone right then because we're about to eat, and then that energy goes into the food and all
right.
the whole thing. But no, this was such a lovely conversation. Thank you for everything. It was great. So
thank you for having me. Thank you for trusting me
absolutely.
with your people, and for the people listening, thank you for exchanging your time to listen to us. That means a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Well, where can everybody find you?
You can find me at Create the Love on most things. I have a podcast called the Mark Groves Podcast. I have an Instagram called It's Mark Groves, where I've posted more of like the stuff specifically about the psychology of what's going on with the pandemic. But those are kind of integrating now. I'm not really sure what it's going to look like. That's the beauty of it. Not knowing is it'll make its way. But yeah, I appreciate everyone listening and having a conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. If you loved this episode, please download, share, rate, and review. If you are ready to step into that next level version of you and grow your business and bank account, it's time to unleash your goddess magic and chase life with Kelly. You can start this epic expansion journey by diving into the Goddess Magic course bundle found at chaselifetogether.com. Please connect with me on Instagram at Chase Life with Kelly. Join the Chase Life with Kelly Facebook community and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Till next time, create the life you crave, babe, and chase life with Kelly.